I'm Indy Neidell.
I'm Spartacus Olsson.
I'm Sebastian Brandstetter.
And this is another World War II fireside chat where Sparty and I sit here next to a roaring fire, which is making this room very hot because you probably see some natural light in here. It's the middle of the afternoon. It's
but
not
we
even
can
close.
see snow.
Yeah, but that's on the mountaintop. It's not even close to freezing. But it's a fireside chat nevertheless. And Sebastian's going to ask us about some aspect of the Second World War. And we're going vaguely in order. So I'm thinking this is something near the end of 1940, early 1941.
You're right about that, Indy.
Okay, what do you think it is?
I think it's going to be something about a different continent in Europe.
A different continent in Europe?
No, than Europe.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe there's a subcontinent I wasn't aware of.
Oh, yeah, the Spanish subcontinent.
Oh, yeah, okay, the Spanish subcontinent.
Both of you are right. We are going to the birth cradle of humanity. Today we're talking about Africa.
Some people might argue about Mesopotamia, but Africa
Also,
originally.
Yeah, I meant evolutionarily.
Oh, evolutionarily, not culturally.
No,
okay.
not cultural.
Okay, we're going to Africa. Great.
We're going to Africa. Obviously, as many of you will know, and for those who don't, I will now state it again, Italy invades Africa.
Yes.
What intelligence and preparations, assessments did the Italians make before they invaded? And did they genuinely believe that the British forces were undersupplied, weak, unprepared?
Yes, and yes. Oh,
Okay.
none and yes.
None and yes. Okay, great. Do you have anything to add? Or?
They did bring some really delicious Italian food, though.
They did, actually, which the British really appreciated once they began to actually...
It's true.
It's very true. No, this was a case of extreme overconfidence in themselves and underconfidence in the enemy. I mean, sending force in September, and then while you're invading Greece and Albania, when you're doing that in October and November, and sending your guys to try to reach Egypt, to reach the Suez Canal, and having to strip, they should have picked one or the other, North Africa or Italy and Greece, because they didn't have the force to do both of these, obviously, as it turned out.
I actually picked out a quote from a somewhat famous historian, who said, Mussolini famously boasted of 8 million bayonets when he had fewer than 1.7 million soldiers, and many of them lacked the rifles on which to place a bayonet.
That's true.
Do you have any idea who's
I
that?
said that.
Yeah, you did.
I said that in
You
an
said
episode.
that.
I remember that. But yes, it's true. You know, the initial failures of the Africa campaign and the total failure of the Greek campaign can be very simply laid at Mussolini's feet. It is also true that Italy in late 1940 went into these campaigns with an army that was smaller and less well equipped than that joined the First World War in 1915, right? This is 25 years later. There was nothing wrong with Italian equipment in general. In fact, there were some fantastic weapons made by the Italians, but they were artisanal weapons. They were not in a position to mass produce the way the other their Axis, the way the Germans were as well. So no, they didn't have the standardization of the equipment, which meant the logistics to go all the way from Tripoli through Cyrenaica all the way to Egypt and then all the way to the Suez Canal was not just wishful thinking, it was a pipe dream. And the Italian soldiers weren't necessarily motivated to rebuild this Roman Empire stuff. I mean, once they crossed the border into Egypt, and went to Fort Capuzzo and Solomon stuff. At Sidi Barrani, like 4 days into the advance, they set up defensive positions. That's what the soldiers did because they didn't have the logistics to really go further. That it was catastrophically poorly planned.
But also kind of useless. I mean, what's the strategy behind taking North Africa except I want to rebuild my empire?
Well, I mean, having the Mediterranean, preventing the British from access to the Mediterranean, that's a great idea, if you're, not if you're British, but if you happen to be the
yeah, but there are other ways of doing that.
But I guess, I don't know if that's true, maybe you can answer that to me, but it seems as though capturing the Suez Canal is also, you basically break the backbone of the British Empire, no? Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration.
Not even capturing it, you're just preventing them from accessing the Mediterranean from that end. You don't even have to capture the canal. You just have to put, if you had an air force or your allies had an air force that could put the canal under constant threat, why would anybody send ships through it?
But there's also, I mean, like I said, there are other ways of doing this. And maybe sending, what was it, 1.7 million men with 8 million bayonets and not enough guns is maybe not the best way of choking the Suez Canal. The Italians...
Malta would have been counterfactual. Again, if you really want to prevent the British from using the Mediterranean, take Malta. Because then how would they use it? They have to go, you can't use it without going by it. Then you don't have to rely on Franco and Spain. You don't have to deal with the Suez Canal. Take Malta.
And use your beautiful fleet before it gets destroyed by an aircraft carrier.
And they had...
Take it and send it to the Suez Canal and blockade it.
Subs. They had all those subs. They had battleships. The Italian fleet gets a hard rap, but it was a very good fleet, with the glaring exception that became painfully evident soon enough at like Taranto, that they did not have naval aircraft. They did not have aircraft carriers and naval aircraft. And this really sabotaged them navally. But initially, you got the subs, you got the battleships. If you had good naval... I cannot emphasize this enough. There was nothing wrong with the Italian sailors. There's nothing wrong with the Italian soldiers. They were brave and they were good fighters. And when they had good equipment, they were fine. But they had catastrophically bad command.
Yeah, you already said this, but I want to go into it a bit more. So the Italians invade, and after a couple of days, they stop at Sidi Barrani, right?
Yeah.
Why do they leave such massive gaps between their defensive boxes? And is this an oversight by planners, or is there some reasoning behind it?
There's something in play here that we haven't mentioned that is very, very important. That the British had cracked the Italian codes, and by late 1940, in North Africa, they knew the deployment of the Italian forces down to the brigade level, down to even smaller levels and stuff. So they knew where all these different little boxes and stuff were. Had they not done that, it would have required aerial reconnaissance, it would have required mobile units to see where you are, and if these boxes are just logistical points going back to Tripoli. It is of immeasurable importance that the British knew exactly where the Italians were. The boxes turned out to be a serious liability, especially because the Italians, who didn't have a lot of combat experience, certainly not a lot of desert combat experience here, made a very static defense, and the British were far more mobile. And if you're more mobile, you know where the enemy is, and you know that he's not going to move. That's a recipe for disaster for him.
But I'd like to add something to this, and it's something that I keep on trying to come back to very often, and that is the difference of looking at a battlefield on a map and looking at it in reality. We're talking about huge distances here. We're talking about, it looks like, okay, why did they leave a gap here and there and there and there? Well, we're talking about literally thousands of kilometers of distance that have to be defended in one way or another. You just don't have enough people to do that. So what they try to do is that they try to find where choke points are, where there's some place where they know that the enemy has to pass through.
Because there are ridges nearby that funnel you towards
But this becomes really difficult in the North African terrain. You are, like Indy said, there are ridges, there are hills, there are all of that, but it's also a very, open landscape. It's not a flat landscape, but it's a very open landscape. That is really, really difficult. So what they both sides tried to do was to find positions from where they could strike back on multiple points. The Italians didn't even have enough people to do that in a way that one...
And their reinforcements were being sent to Greece. So once they've got to Sidi Barrani, their vehicles, their logistics are already falling apart, and they're not getting replacements. So static defense makes perfect sense. The British are much closer to home. They're in Egypt. They can afford to send trucks out and let them break down and stuff.
Operation Compass exposed all these weaknesses of the Italian military. What were the fundamental flaws of Italian doctrine, equipment, training, and leadership?
By the end of Operation Compass, the British logistics were as bad as the Italian ones were, but that was at the end. The Italians were that bad at the beginning of Operation Compass.
I mean, we already established that the Italians were under-equipped.
Yes.
But can you talk a bit more about the British advantage in equipment? So what exactly?
Well,
where?
even at initially, I mean, like I mentioned, the Italians had tankettes. When the British had Matilda tanks, the Italians had no answer to them at first. Now they later got, especially once the Germans arrived with, Mark 3s and Mark 4s and stuff, and 88 millimeter guns, but that's a bit later. there were massive advantages, and also the shorter supply lines and more supply.
I think the Italians didn't even bring anti-tank guns with them.
Well, they didn't have anything that could handle a Matilda, no. You know, with the results, which are predictable, they have no answer to your armor. You're more mobile anyway. They're in static defense postures. So when Operation Compass went off, it destroyed Graziani's whole 10th Army. You're talking a loss of 10 entire divisions. I mean, that's a massive amount of the Italian overall force. What, 150,000, 200,000 men? I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's well over 100,000 men lost for minimal casualties on the British side. And once on, I think it was February 5th, because that's the day that Rommel got his assignment. That's when, of course, Hitler realizes that he's got to send force down to Africa. But the directive is also to send force down to Tripoli and also to send force to help to Albania. And he's already decided he's going to invade Greece. That order came out in December. But Operation Compass was a huge, huge deal, particularly for British morale. I mean, you got to think, this is still the Battle of Britain is still going on. The Blitz has still been going on all this time. The British need a win. Their first win comes in East Africa, and then this major victory, mashing the Italians and taking 150,000 men. That's an enormous deal.
It quickly achieves mythical qualities with.
It puts Hitler on the defensive because he has to help out an ally. Although there's more to. I mean, he was well aware of what taking the Mediterranean would do, what would deny to the British.
I mean, that actually segues perfectly into my next question. German intervention in North Africa was a must from a strategic perspective, right? They couldn't have just left Africa alone, let the Italians be kicked out, and then the Allied powers.
It's interesting if you think, what if Italy? It's a what if, right? But if Italy had no need to attack in North Africa, had no need to attack Greece and Albania, and Hitler had no real interest in Southeastern and Southern Europe anyway. I mean, the war was essentially a Northern European war until Hitler had to bail out Italy, and then it became a Southern war and a Mediterranean war. I mean, it changed the entire character of the war. But yeah, he's already been planning for Barbarossa, for invading the Soviet Union. And Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, he really wants to secure the Mediterranean first, because that will, since it's obvious by now that they're not going to win over Britain quickly. They can't.
The sea line is dead.
The sea line's long dead. The Blitz isn't making them want to give up. But minimizing Britain as any sort of threat would certainly help. And sealing the ends of the Mediterranean would do that, right? So there was plenty of debate among Hitler's gang about which order they should do things. Should they focus on the Mediterranean, or should they focus on Barbarossa? Now, Hitler, being Hitler, he's going to do both.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is that here the Italians really do the Germans a huge disservice, because if they hadn't attacked in all of these places, then Hitler could have held his back door closed, because that's his biggest worry. It's the back door. It's not everybody's. Oh, it's the oil fields in Egypt, and
that's what I was wondering as well.
Yeah, but that's not the case, because first of all, at this point, these oil fields that are then in Saudi Arabia and so on further on, they're not very exploited. So we don't have a lot of oil coming out of that region at this point. So that's not really a factor. What is a factor is Hitler's legitimate worry about having a back door opened through the Balkans, right? Yeah. But that back door is closed as long as Italy doesn't attack. Once Italy attacks Albania and Greece, well, we have a problem, because now you've pulled Albania and Greece into the war. So that gives the Allies a reason to help them and move in that direction. And that then makes North Africa important, because now that they're fighting in North Africa, well, if the British hold on to North Africa, or the British Commonwealth, because New Zealanders, Australians are there as well, and Canadians, and lots of people. But if they hold on to North Africa, they have a staging area to go towards the Balkans. And this is one of Hitler's biggest worries. So that goes towards, is it then a necessity or is it a desire? Well, it's more a necessity than a desire because of that, simply.
But there's something bigger at play. even bigger worry at play, which we haven't mentioned yet. With the complete failure against Greece and needing to be bailed there out, and the catastrophe of losing the entire 10th Army in North Africa, Mussolini's popularity takes a real hit. And there's a very real chance in early 1941 that Mussolini will be toppled from power. Now,
does Hitler want that?
Well, not only does he not want that, but there's also a very real chance that what replaces Mussolini is an allied-friendly, democratic sort of government.
Or a communist.
And Hitler absolutely could not afford to have that.
I mean, we know this happens in 1943. So, you know, it is a what if.
Just think, if Italy was an ally, if Italy was an ally in 1941 and the British had no problem sending troops through Gibraltar or anything, you'd send thousands and thousands of men into North Italy.
Yeah. And then Mussolini had also already built the fortresses looking at Germany in like the early 30s, so in the Alpine belt.
Well, I mean, the first fight in the Alps didn't go so well for the Italians.
No. Oh yeah, going against the French. Yeah. We talked about that in one of these, didn't we?
Okay, but I have another question about this. So, in my notes, I have it here that the British stop at El Agheila, thank you, on February 9th.
Yes.
And the reason they stop is because Churchill has a directive prioritizing military help for Greece over exploiting the gains in North Africa.
Well, yeah, there was some...
because of the impending arrival of German reinforcements. Is Greece, or the two-side attack by Italy, Greece, Albania, and North Africa, is that here for the first time an upside? Because Britain also has to prioritize where they go?
Archie Wavell puts it as an immediate priority and holds off O'Connor, who wants to go as far as he can, to Tobruk, to Tripoli. I don't think he could have got to Tripoli, but he wants to. Even though after Compass, his stuff is in pretty bad shape. But Wavell strips the North African front to send unit force to Greece, right? He does, because Wavell is well aware that after destroying an entire Italian army, Italy cannot do anything in North Africa. And of course, Wavell doesn't know that an Afrika Korps is, one, about to arrive, and two, about to attack. Even when Rommel and the Afrika Korps arrive, Wavell's like, well, we can send force to Greece because there's no way they can attack before May. And he was very wrong about that. Rommel attacks as soon as he can.
Before we move on to the Afrika Korps, I have one question for you.
Okay.
The British, they take over 100,000 up to 150,000 prisoners, as Indy just said, of 10th Army. How were they treated? And were they basically out of the war for good?
Well, it's not an easy question to answer because we don't have extremely well documented sources to see exactly how the Italians held by the Western Allies in general were treated. But there are a few things that we do know, and we can also just deduce some things from what's going on in the region they're in, which is a desert. So it's really difficult to hold that many prisoners in the region that they're in. And this quickly leads to shortages of water, shortages of shelter. So the living conditions in these camps aren't great, to put it mildly. Yeah. If the later, and I'm jumping forward here a little bit, if the later treatment of Italian prisoners of war is an indication, they were treated horribly. Because once the French enter into the war, when the colonial French join the Free French and we're talking about the Libyan campaign and stuff like that, they take over a lot of these prisoners and they take some new prisoners, and they are treated beyond bad.
They're used for like mine clearing duty.
Yeah.
Like they have to go out and find
work
mines.
14-hour days building railroads in the desert, in the sun.
They're also treated exceptionally badly when they have local guards, when they have local North African guards.
I'm not going to go there because some of it is definitely racist, but there is the fear of sexual violence coming from the North African guards. Sodomy and so on is I don't know how true that is. I don't know how much it is fear stoked by racism or if it is actual fear for it. If we go back a little bit to the First World War, it's not completely unjustified because there we have a lot of documented cases of that kind of behavior. So all of that comes together in something that I would say not the ideal place to be a prisoner in. It's definitely better to be an Allied prisoner in Germany or a Axis prisoner in Western Europe than to be an Italian prisoner in North Africa. Is it a war crime? Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, all of this is, the Allies here are not doing what they're supposed to do according to the conventions.
So let's get one thing straight. Gentleman war in North Africa, never a thing.
Certainly gentlemen.
Never a thing.
No, but it was more gentlemanly than many other places.
Yes,
if we look at the behavior of the actual
of war.
If we look at the actual behavior of the forces on the battlefield. So you have famous instances of this that have been documented of how they're actually helping each other out under the difficult desert conditions. They're exchanging water. They're sending fuel to each other, which is unheard of anywhere else. They're also respecting curfews and stuff like that.
True.
But this is not so much a question of that they were more gentlemanly than anybody else. It's more a question of that they're fighting in an environment which is deadly as it is. And the purpose of being there is not to die from starvation or from dehydration or from a sandstorm. The purpose there is to interdict the enemy, move the enemy out. So, and you know that if I don't help you, you won't help me. So my life depends on that I can give you some water and you'll give me some water.
So that we
and then we can fight,
shoot each other.
And then we can fight tomorrow. There is, one example of this was a couple of units had set up communications. They decided we're not going to fight after 5 o'clock. They even stopped for tea and stuff like that. And they had set up some rules for how to behave towards each other in order to not put each other's lives in danger. That was no stealing of the other side's equipment. We barter, we trade. So no hijacking of trucks, and curfew at 5 o'clock. And we call and we say, because one thing that you shouldn't underestimate is how dangerous it is to go into the desert itself. So if somebody's out there, you're going to go look for them, but that puts you at risk. So what they did was that they decided we're going to call each other every day, and we're going to tell the other side how many prisoners we've taken and who they are, so that people don't send out a patrol looking for them at the peril of their life. So they're doing all of this, and all of that is it's great respect. And then the new German German reinforcements arrive, and they don't know about this arrangement. And they hijack a truck full of equipment and supplies, which infuriates the German command on that side, because they're like, now the Brits are not going to hold up to their side of the bargain, and it's over. And correctly so. As of that moment, that deal was off, and people died of dehydration and getting lost in the desert.
Funny you should mention the German reinforcements, because looking at the time, we've taken a bit too much time. Okay. So I think what we'll do is we'll wrap things up here, and we'll do another part where we exclusively talk, or we begin with the Germans arriving in North Africa, and then we talk about the other stuff that we haven't gotten to.
All right. Well, for myself, Sparty, and Sebastian, that was another exciting fireside chat. If you want more of these and you want us to make more cool stuff like our upcoming 10-part day-by-day chronological coverage of the breakthrough at Sedan, about the myths and realities, which is going to be really exciting, then you should join the TimeGhost army, because that is what allows us to do all of these things. Do not forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Excelsior!